Regarding the royal family of England, I have some concerning news. Princess Anne's husband discovers an unexpected fact about Queen Camilla as a royal conflict degenerates into a startling revelation. At first, it started out quietly, freely. Let's avoid becoming overly politically correct, please. Like the majority of royal affairs that are never reported. My queen consort is her. I am aware. She will apply her unwavering dedication to the challenges of her new position. The air at Balmoral that week, however, was odd, according to those who were close enough to notice. King Charles had just returned from a brief visit to his secret hideaway Birkhall. I believe he will change. He is dedicated to providing his own level of service, and it's possible that this may continue. Where he'd been told to lie down, after undergoing additional medical examinations. Oh, he seemed composed in public, but those who knew him well could see the stress beneath the staged grins. Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence, Princess Anne's husband, had previously seen it. He was trained to read microscopic details, the little things that others overlooked, by his years of duty in the Royal Navy. Additionally, he had recently started to notice Camilla's increasing influence over even the most private matters pertaining to the king's health, as well as changes in Charles' schedule and the addition of a new group. Camilla's involvement was not out of the ordinary. She had supported Charles for decades, after all. This time, though, something was different. The family no longer openly discussed the doctor's visits. The king's closest relative abruptly ceased sending Anne certain medical letters that she would often copy into. Even Charles's longtime private aides were being replaced by people only Camilla appeared to recognize. Initially dismissed it as a result of the king's transition to a more leisurely way of life. During a supper at Gatco Park one evening, she had told Tim, "He's just tired. Camilla has good intentions." If Tim had shaken his head, she believes it would have helped to keep him engaged. It's not that I've witnessed people gradually lose control of their own lives without even recognizing it. At this point it wasn't implying anything dramatic. However, the tone of her voice unnerved him when he received a call from an old friend of the royal household. "Sir Timothy," she muttered, "some of us are concerned, and I'm not sure if I should even say this. It appears that His Majesty has little influence these days. The Queen is the one who oversees everything." Was when Tim made the decision to listen more intently. His observations became increasingly concerning over the course of the following few weeks. Camilla was consistently present in all private settings as well as at formal events. She instructed Charles' workers, sat in on phone conversations, and even started answering letters addressed to the king. Although she had always been charming due to her confidence, this appeared more like dominance. Observed her sibling growing more reclusive. To talk about it, she gave Tim a call. She said, "He's not himself." His phone tone sounds strange as well. Tim paid close attention. "Is there something wrong with him in your opinion? Or is it those in his immediate vicinity?" he inquired. Anne took a moment to respond. "It's both, I believe." The pivotal moment occurred at Clarence's house during a family supper. Anne had asked Tim to go with her. Maintain harmony. Charles hardly touched his supper and excused himself halfway through the meal. He'd had a long morning, Camilla stated with a kind grin. However, she did not have a worried expression on her face. It involved computation. Tim saw a folder with the king's initials engraved on it on a side table as visitors were departing. He looked through the contents and found medical notes from a different doctor than the one Charles had always relied on. A number of private consultations that were planned outside of the standard royal medical channels were highlighted in the documents. It's not Charles' signature at the bottom. Everything changed with that finding. Tim was slow to confront Camille. He was wise enough to avoid making unfounded accusations. Rather, he copied the document and brought it to Anne. She remarked, "This is not angry," as she noticed her expression hardened. Charles himself would never approve of this. Anne and Tim started monitoring little but questionable things after that day. They saw that the men Charles had trusted for years, his old buddies, had stopped coming to see him. Longtime aides had discreetly retired or been reassigned. When the Queen was present, even the domestic workers were more anxious than normal. Tim had a gut feeling that something was being concealed. Tried to bring up the matter when they were out for a private walk with Camilla, accessibility who genuinely comprehends him. He knew that he saw a mixture of defiance and terror in her eyes, but he was afraid to speak. Charles's medical records weren't the only thing being safeguarded. Tim discreetly set the duplicated folder on the table between them that evening while Anne was reading in their living room. "We have to find out what this is before it's too late," he remarked. What they learnt in the days that followed, which fundamentally altered the family's trust and exposed a secret Camilla had spent years trying to conceal. Although Sir Timothy had always been a patient man who was taught to consider his actions before taking them, his uneasiness increased as he learnt more about the situation. The alleged doctor identified was not a member of the royal medical household, and the dates did not correspond with the king's formal appointments. Someone appeared to have access to Charles' whole schedule and had been setting up private evaluations without anybody else's awareness. She advised him to avoid drawing hasty conclusions. "Before we level any charges, we must be certain." She was obviously uneasy though. She and her brother had always been honest with one another. She had been there for him during the turmoil that followed his marriage to Camilla, and during the worst times of his divorce. Charles might now be isolated, even controlled according to this theory. Quite concerning. Tim began to double-check the name of the doctor. Even worse was the fact that he was a private consultant with ties to a health foundation Camilla had long backed. Insiders had expressed concern about the foundation's ambiguous operations and unexpected surge in foreign funding. The timing seems off. Charles had decreased his public responsibilities at the same time, citing his health. The crowd's more noticeable face was now Camilla, representing the king at a number of occasions where he would typically have made an appearance. Those inside the circle knew better than the general public, who believed it to be a transitory arrangement. Camilla was filling a need she was creating, not because she had a duty to do so. Tim and Anne were walking the grounds of Sandringham one evening when Tim brought up the subject once more. He responded firmly, "Anne, this isn't about his health anymore. The story is being controlled by someone. Only everything that Camilla approves are released by the palace press office." She grimaced, pulling her scarf closer as though she was running everything. "We can't do this alone if that's the case. William must be aware." But it wasn't easy to inform William. With his personal obligations and his father's shortened schedule, the Prince of Wales was already under strain. The media would grab on any indication of disagreement. "We'll gather more evidence first," Tim suggested. "If we go to him, it has to be with facts, not suspicions." Over the next few days, Tim began to notice new details that confirmed his worries. Camilla had replaced several senior members of the household, bringing in people with connections to her own circle, former staff from Clarence House, and even a few personal acquaintances from her charity work. The king's private secretary, a man who had served Charles loyally for over a decade, suddenly took early retirement and confronted one of the aides she trusted, a middle-aged woman who had worked for their mother, the late Queen Elizabeth. The aide hesitated before speaking. "Your Royal Highness, things have changed. The Queen keeps His Majesty's schedule closed now. Most of us don't see him unless she's present. It's uncomfortable." That word lingered with Anne. Uncomfortable. The situation was beginning to look like more than overprotectiveness. Tim suspected Camilla was hiding something about Charles's condition, something that could change how the public saw both of them. When he finally got his hands on another copy of the king's private health records smuggled out by sympathetic aid, he understood why. The documents suggested that Charles' medical team had been pressured to alter their reports before submission to the Privy Council. The changes were small but significant as they omitted certain side effects from his treatment and minimized symptoms that pointed to exhaustion and cognitive stress. When Tim shared this with Anne, she sat in silence for a long moment. "You're saying she's keeping him unwell?" "Not exactly," he replied, "but she's certainly keeping the truth from everyone else. Maybe even from him." They knew they couldn't take the information to the press. The fallout would be catastrophic. Instead, Anne decided to reach out to an old friend of the family, Lord Robert Fellows, a retired courtier, who had served under Queen Elizabeth II. Discreet and fiercely loyal, he agreed to help them verify the authenticity of the documents. After reviewing them, his verdict was grim. "If these are genuine," he said, "then someone is tampering with official medical communications. That's not only unethical, it's illegal." Tim felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. He wasn't just dealing with palace gossip anymore. He was staring at a coordinated cover-up, and the person orchestrating it was sitting at the heart of the monarchy. The next morning, during the breakfast at Clarence's house, he noticed Camilla watching him across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but her words were clear. "Sir Timothy, I hear you've taken quite an interest in His Majesty's affairs lately. Be careful, curiosity can be dangerous, even for family." Her tone was polite, but the message behind it was unmistakable. That evening, as Anne and Tim returned to Gatcombe Park, he could no longer keep his thoughts to himself. "She knows we're looking into her," he said, "and she's not afraid to make that clear." Anne's reply was firm. "Then, we'll keep going, because whatever she's hiding, we're not stopping until we find out." Neither of them realized that someone close to Camilla had already started following their movements, and what came next would prove just how far she was willing to go to protect her secret. The days that followed were tense. At Gatcombe Park, tried to maintain her usual routine, horses in the morning, paperwork in the afternoon, but even her staff could tell something was different. Sir Timothy was spending long hours in his study, speaking on the phone or looking over documents that he locked away after each use. Tim's main concern was that Camilla's control was tightening. Every decision related to the king now passed through her private secretary, a man named Richard Winthrop, who had previously managed her charities. Under his supervision, access to Charles had become even more restricted. Visitors needed written approval, and every conversation was logged. Anne found it infuriating. "This isn't how our family operates," she told Tim. "We were raised to face problems directly, not to hide behind staff." Tim nodded. "That's exactly what worries me. Someone is trying to reshape the whole system around her." To dig deeper, Tim reached out to a trusted contact still working within the palace's security network, an old Navy acquaintance who had taken a position in royal protection. What he learned confirmed his worst fears. "It's subtle," his friend said, "but there's definitely been a shift. Orders are being rerouted through the Queen's office. Even security briefings for His Majesty are filtered before reaching him." Tim felt a chill, but the real revelation came from a different source. During a private visit to Windsor, Tim ran into a former equerry, who had retired shortly after Charles's coronation. The man seemed nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as they spoke. "Sir Timothy, there's something I think you should know," he whispered. "Before I left, I was told to destroy several files from Clarence's house. They were personal documents, letters, and old reports, but one of them mentioned a fund in Camilla's name, something to do with a trust in the Channel Islands." Tim raised an eyebrow. "A trust? For what purpose?" "That's just it," the equity replied. "It didn't list one, but the funds came from several overseas donors, some connected to a private health company. The same name appeared in those medical files you mentioned." The pieces were starting to fit together. Camilla's foundation, her influence over Charles's doctors, and now a secret trust connected to foreign interests were all part of a pattern. But Tim still needed proof that tied everything directly to her. Anne listened carefully as he laid out his findings. "If this is true," she said, "then her motive isn't just control, it's self-preservation." She's protecting something that could destroy her if it came out. That night, Anne drafted a discreet letter to Prince William. She didn't want to alarm him, only to share her concern in measured terms. There are matters surrounding your father's health and the Queen's management that deserve attention, she wrote. Tim and I believe it's in the family's best interest to review them privately. William replied 2 days later, asking to meet in person. The meeting took place at Kensington Palace, late in the evening. He greeted them warmly, but with visible concern. "I've had my suspicions," he admitted, "but if what you're saying is true, it's worse than I imagined." Tim showed him copies of the altered medical reports and summaries of the financial records. William's expression hardened. "My father trusts her completely. If she's keeping things from him, it means she's also keeping things from the entire institution." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We need to confirm the origin of that trust. If it's linked to a company involved in his treatment, it could be a conflict of interest or worse." With William's help, Tim gained access to a discreet legal contact who specialized in tracing hidden financial trails. Within a week, the results came back. The trust had been set up over a decade earlier, originally to fund Camilla's personal projects, but in recent years, it had been used to channel payments from private healthcare firms. Some of those same firms had recently secured quiet contracts to provide consulting for royal medical staff. The discovery stunned even Anne, so she's been mixing personal and royal interests. That's not only unethical, it's dangerous. Tim knew they couldn't go public. Exposing it outright would damage the monarchy irreparably, but they had to act. "We'll confront her directly," he said. "If we handle this within the family, we can stop it before it becomes a scandal." The following week, during a small gathering at Highgrove, Tim found the opportunity. As the evening drew to a close, he approached Camilla privately. "There's something you need to be honest about," he said, his voice calm, but firm. "The trust, the doctors, the reports, it all points back to you." "Why?" Camilla stared at him for a long moment before replying. "You think you understand, but you don't. Everything I've done is to protect the king. If the truth came out about his condition, the crown would never survive the pressure." Her words caught him off guard. "So it's about him, not you." Camilla's gaze didn't waver. "Believe what you want, Sir Timothy. But remember this. Some secrets are buried for a reason." Her calmness unnerved him. She wasn't denying anything, yet she wasn't admitting guilt either. As he walked away, Tim couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding more than just financial impropriety. He sensed that the real secret was something far deeper and far more personal. The days that followed were tense. The smallest gestures carried heavy meaning, and the press, without knowing the full truth, could sense that something was wrong. Behind palace doors, private discussions were becoming more heated. What started as a quiet exchange between two royal households was now threatening to become a full-blown internal crisis. Tim Lawrence had never seen Anne this unsettled. Usually calm, composed and rational, she now found herself pacing around her sitting room at Gatcombe Park, reading over letters and emails that she refused to show him. When he pressed her, she only said, "It's not something I can ignore, Tim. If this gets out, it could ruin everything." He began to understand that the secret Camilla carried was not just personal, but political. It reached deep into the monarchy's public image and the family's internal balance. The issue, as far as he could piece together, involved decisions made during the early years of Charles and Camilla's marriage, including arrangements regarding certain charities that had raised eyebrows within royal circles. Camilla, aware of the whispers, decided to confront Anne directly. It happened at Clarence House one late afternoon. The two women were seated opposite each other, the tension thick in the air. Camilla began first, her tone defensive but tired. "Anne, I've heard what people are saying. That's not true, and you know it." Anne looked her in the eye. "I don't deal in gossip, Camilla, I deal in facts, and what I've seen raises serious questions. There are donations missing, unaccounted for, and yet the Foundation's records show everything in order. Either someone made a mistake, or someone covered it up. Camilla's expression hardened. Be careful with your words, you're implying something you can't prove. Anne replied firmly, then helped me understand it, because I can't protect the family if there are things being hidden. Neither of them said anything for a while. But you wouldn't understand, Camilla remarked, with a final sigh as she leaned back. You've always felt that I wasn't a good fit for this family, but you don't realize how much work it required to maintain stability after Diana. Not at all. That was a powerful sentence. Although Anne was aware that Camilla was correct in that regard, Camilla was unaware that a former royal aide had recently presented evidence that suggested multiple private meetings between Camilla and influential donors had occurred, with unrecorded financial benefits. Charles, meanwhile, started to observe that his sister and his wife were becoming more and more distant. He sought to lighten the mood at a private family lunch. However, it was evident from Anne's succinct responses and Camilla's strained civility that there was no simple solution. The younger royals were starting to pick up on it as well. Having always respected his aunt's moral character, Prince William discreetly inquired about her well-being. Her answer was straightforward. Even if it hurts, some things must be revealed. However, things were going to become worse. A prominent journalist with royal coverage received information from someone inside the palace, indicating that a senior royal had doubted a royal spouse's financial stability. Despite the absence of names, conjecture was rampant. Theories were circulating on social media, and Clarence House was the center of attention within hours. Camilla was enraged. That evening, her voice trembling, she called Anne directly. Was that you? Have you informed them? Anne was taken aback. Of course not. Never in my life would I go to the press. Then, who did? Camilla made a demand, because Charles is furious, and the entire world is now speculating. It won't be me who looks bad if this blows up. The family will be involved. With caution and bitterness, the words hovered between them. Anne took a while to respond. She was torn between her family allegiance and her sense of obligation. The distinction between devastation and truth was more hazy than before. Tim discovered her sitting by the window that evening, with a note from her assistant resting on her lap. I thought exposing it would make things right, she muttered. Perhaps, however, there is no longer a right way, but what she did next would absolutely stun everyone in the royal household, and change everything. The palace was in disarray the following morning. "Royal Rift Deepens" was the headline that appeared in every major newspaper. Insiders rumored that Princess Anne and Queen Camilla were at odds, but no one was named. Anne stayed away from any public gatherings for the first time in years. Tim could see that she was stuck between her conscience and her brother's allegiance. Camilla was shaken but angry at Clarence House. She cancelled 2 appointments and declined to speak to the media, declaring unwell. Charles, on the other hand, was attempting to control the consequences. His voice sounded tired as he contacted Anne directly. "Anne, this cannot continue. We've been through too much to allow this to ruin our family." Anne gave a forceful but quiet response. Then Charles, "Be honest with me. Did she do it?" A long pause ensued. It was not denied by Charles. He claimed that instead, actions were taken to safeguard the throne. Although she made mistakes, she is not the enemy. Tim and Anne sat by the fire in Gatcombe Park that evening. She remarked, "I never wanted it to go this far. However, the harm will be much worse if the public ever learns about everything." Tim examined her intently. "So what are you going to do?" Anne inhaled deeply. "I'll defend the organization, not the falsehoods." She set up a private meeting with Camilla at Highgrove for the next day. Just the 2 of them. No notes, no help. Although there was a lot of tension, Camilla didn't appear upset this time. She appeared worn out. "I don't hate you, Camilla," Anne started. "All I need to know is that the actions taken will not be repeated. Another controversy is too much for the family to handle. Slowly, Camilla nodded. Do you think I'm unaware of that? I did everything I could to keep us together. I made decisions I thought were necessary. Anne looked at her for a long moment. Necessary or not, they crossed lines. People were hurt, and now we're paying for it. Camilla didn't respond right away. Then she reached into her bag and handed Anne a thin envelope. Inside were letters, personal ones, between Camilla and senior aides from years earlier. They detailed arrangements made to divert certain donations meant for public causes into private trust funds for safeguarding royal operations. It wasn't criminal, but it was morally questionable. I can't undo it, Camilla said quietly, but I'll make it right. The truth can stay between us. Let me fix it my way. Anne nodded, though her expression didn't soften. You have one chance. After that, even family won't shield you. When Anne returned home, Tim asked if she felt relieved. She gave a headshake. Just aware. No, we constantly believe that the truth will make things right, but occasionally it merely serves to remind us of what is flawed. The press moved on in the ensuing weeks. As if nothing had occurred, Camilla smiled at engagements and went back to work. Charles was by her side more often, and the family once again exuded oneness. The true tale and the tenuous piece that held it all together were only known to Anne and Tim. Nevertheless, Anne had changed in some way, because of what people were ready to conceal for the sake of their reputation, rather than because of outside influences. She had witnessed how close the monarchy had come to disintegrating. She said, "The crown will endure, but not because of secrets." As Tim joined her on the porch one evening, Tim did not respond. It endures when someone is brave enough to face them. He simply observed Anne's serene yet aloof demeanor as she gazed into the waning twilight. For now, it was sufficient that she had done all she could. However, they both knew in their hearts that the truth was never kept hidden for very long. All it was doing was waiting for its next outburst. How do you feel about Princess Anne's audacious choice to face reality? Should she have revealed everything at once, or was it appropriate for her to safeguard the crown in this manner? Leave a comment below with your opinions. For more, don't forget to subscribe, like and share. Additionally, click the next video that appears on your screen. You'll like it.